Good afternoon. I was preparing to get up here. I saw scrolling on the bottom line that my good friend Rand Carthon had gotten the job for the Titans, and had an immense moment of gratitude and pride for my friend, but also really thinking about all that's transpired here, in these past months. First and foremost, I just felt so much gratitude to all the people here, coaches, players, staff, that made the transition with us, moved their families, gave their heart and soul to this season. So I want to make sure I start off by saying that. It's been almost a year to the day that I got up here, talked about vision and plans and all these things. And, the sudden death tournament, it always ends abruptly for every team but one. We're, as a building, we're kind of going through that right now. So it's time to sit back and reflect on the year and what's happened. And at the end of the day, we didn't play well enough to continue on, and that's something that we're feeling right now, and that hurts for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, I think these players showed so much. They deserve to play longer. The resilience they showed throughout this season, the joy they brought to this building every day was something that I admired, and I hurt for them because I feel like they deserve to be playing longer. I hurt for our fans, our organization. As I left my personnel suite for the last time this season, I was walking behind a group of fans, and one of them said that she had been a longtime Vikings fan and always felt let down, and this team felt different to her. And then, sure enough, she ended up in the same place. And I'm sure a lot of fans might be going through that right now, and and that hurts to hear. I can't lie, but I understand where that's coming from. So. Ultimately, we didn't accomplish the goals we want to accomplish, and I always want to be respectful of that. But the things we did accomplish, I think were incredibly impactful. I think we laid a foundation for where we want to go. I think we showed a building full of people, players, coaches, staff, ownership group, this guy next to me that have the ability to be their best when their best is required. And I think that's what we need to go where we want to go eventually. Like Ko said in his final meeting, it's supposed to hurt. It's supposed to sting. Again, we're still feeling that here. But I will say that hurt, that sting, that will drive us, that will motivate us to lead this organization to the place we want to go. I know this guy next to me and myself, we will lead and push and drive because we don't want to feel this way this early ever again, and we want to be there consistently with the chance to win it. We don't know any other way.
Yeah, just looking at all that's transpired since getting an opportunity to start working alongside Kwesi and all the great people we have in this building. As I told our team, and Kwesi just mentioned it, it's supposed to sting, it's supposed to hurt. But I did want to take the time to reflect, I think, to reflect and to move forward the right way, reflecting on what we're able to accomplish as a football team, an NFC North title and 13 wins. It goes beyond that, understanding the goals of culture and the goals of building this building up through our leadership and setting a foundation and a platform for every individual in this building to feel like they could thrive and grow and eventually reach their truest, highest potential. I feel like that foundation's in place. And when I think about all that went into it from a coaching staff standpoint, our players, our leadership of our core leaders and foundation of such a great leadership group that I was able to have, in my first year as a head coach in the National Football League, I truly feel, very fortunate and blessed. But as we reflect, I think it's important to understand, be honest with our evaluations, understand taking a look at all the little things and understanding no detail is too small of how we can try to improve as a team, improve as a coaching staff, and most importantly, improve myself to better myself and make sure that I'm doing everything I can in this role that I feel so so lucky to have and also so prepared to have. And I feel like the things we're going to do moving forward as an organization can be, after the things we've done this year, we can start talking about the next step is a championship standard. and wanting to make sure that all the things that I do in my role, all the evaluations that I'll do, all the dialogue we've had over the last 3 days with players and coaches, and making sure that this season, 2022, wraps up the way it should, with the same type of connection and the same type of dialogue and communication with our players, and the foundational building blocks of what we want to be, making sure that the standard of knowing we've got the culture, knowing we've got the right things going in this building now. We've got to all, the last phase of that is the accountability to each other to make sure that that standard is championship worthy. And we're putting ourselves in that conversation and to a man and a woman in this building, that we're looking at each other and asking ourselves a question with everything we do: is it championship worthy? Is it to that standard? Is it to that line? And just in all of our dialogue Monday with our players, getting a chance to meet with each and every one of them, they understand that. And they're motivated for that, and at the same time proud of what they accomplished this year. And I look forward, to the first day of the off-season program when we get those guys back in here. I did want to take a quick second and just thank Ziggy and Mark Wilf for their support and trust in us with their organization, and all of which they were for me this year as a first-time head coach, and their dialogue. And like I said, the support was just tremendous. My coaching staff, all of our players, doesn't get talked about enough, but the support staff of what you build from a culture standpoint matters, but it only matters if it's felt throughout our whole building. Tyler, Uriah, Josh Hinkst, our entire sports performance staff, and all that they did for our players, and understanding our way of doing things and why it was important and why the little things mattered. And then ultimately, without a doubt, Kwesi and his staff from day one. Just the feeling of feeling like we are all in this together, pulling in the same direction, and with a goal that is of the highest proportions. It's just special for me. I feel even better about my role here and my ability to thrive in my role. I feel even better about that today than I did day one talking to you guys, and I think that's really important to say. And just all of our staff behind the scenes, my family. I mean, this first year coming off of the year last year into this year, I know sometimes I think my wife and kids probably feel like it never really ended for them as well, and just the sacrifices that they've made, the love they have now of this community and being a part of it. And then last but not least, certainly our fans. Every time I got a chance to say to you guys throughout the week on Wednesdays how excited we were to be back at US Bank Stadium, and what they meant all the way down to the very last snap of this season, the importance and their value to both Kwesi and myself of what they mean to this organization. We're so blessed and fortunate to have the fan base that we do.
Questions?
Kwesi, if you're into the stock market, where would the Viking stock be right now?
That is a phenomenal leadoff question. Man, I'm a little out of it, so I couldn't even tell you where the S&P 500 is. But I would say, obviously you have startups, and then you have, longer tenured. Your core have earned money for a long period of time, and they're less growth stocks. I think we're somewhere in between. I think we're. All right.
Well done.
I think we're somewhere in between. I think, a startup in a sense that we, we're a transition. We brought in a new culture. We brought in a new way of playing. But I think this year, obviously, we established our ability to earn, and in our business, earning is wins. And we've shown that we have a culture and ability to do those things at a really high level. But I wouldn't say that we're that established their team, because we haven't shown it yet. We haven't shown our ability to come in year out, compete in the playoffs, and do those things we want to be. So that's why I'd say we're kind of in between those two stages right now, and we're trying to be that mature team that goes every year consistently to the playoffs to compete at a championship standard.
For both of you, will Ed Donatel return as defensive coordinator?
Yeah, Chris, I'm in the process of going through, as we did with our players on Monday. I don't know the total number between practice squad, IR, and our roster guys, but Kwesi and I had a chance to sit down and speak face-to-face with everyone, get their feelings on, both the individual and collective, thoughts on where we're at right now. And then over the past couple days, and it's ongoing, I'm doing the same thing with my entire coaching staff. I'm in an evaluation mode of everything that we did. I think that's really important as you part of self-reflecting and part of us reflecting as a staff is making sure we're taking a look at every aspect of our football team and our coaching staff to make sure that we're doing everything within my responsibility and my power to put our players and our organization in the best possible situation to have success. So that is an ongoing process that is continuing as we speak, and will continue throughout the rest of this week. And I think it's important to do, and I think after the success we had this year and then coming up short of where we ultimately wanted to get to, I think it's the right thing to do and make sure I go through that thorough process in doing so.
You two had talked a lot about building a culture here. Now you have some football decisions to make. Some of the guys who built the culture, your captains, so to speak, you're going to have to make some tough football decisions on. Where do you draw the line between what they can do on the football field and what they do in that locker room? And how do you add value to that?
Yeah, it's again, it's this complex equation we're always trying to solve, but you nailed it perfectly. Let's start off by recognizing that those are great football players, great people, core foundational elements of our culture. We talk about culture meaning process and the way we do things, but it's also just the people, how they relate, how they show up and set a standard. And that group of people is going to be, to your point, they were foundational in that element. So we've got to consider those things also in addition to the production on the field. But really, at the end of the day, we're trying to meet a talent threshold, a way of playing, a vision for this team that's a championship standard, and how we get there will look different year in and year out. But we'll consider all those things as we go forward.
Kevin, you get a lot involved in the defensive scheme. As we watch, as a layman, you're wondering, is it scheme sometimes, or is it guys are long in the tooth? How involved do you get in that in terms of fine tooth combing? We're on the right scheme, or versus, hey, we got to get different personnel.
Yeah, I think it's a mix of both as part of the process as we evaluate our roster. But knowing that I am responsible for whatever schemes we put on the field, that evaluation process goes through not only the course of this season and my role in contributing to the three phases of our team, but also throughout the year, the expectations that were in place and the hopes and goals for our team tied hand in hand, week in and week out. What's it going to take to win a football game? And the ebbs and flows of a season. I think when you look back through it, scheme-wise, there's always going to be things I know offensively we can do differently and better for our players. Special teams feels the same way, and defensively, it's the same thing with that evaluation process of understanding what we were this year, the reality of it, being accountable to that. And then understanding in my role, my responsibility is fixing problems and making sure that whatever path we take moving forward is in the best interest of continuing on a trek to be at that championship standard. And I think it's important to acknowledge the things that happened this year, the positives, the foundational things we can build upon. But when you establish a culture and all the things you talk about, the phasing of championship standards has to be something that you can really look at honestly, and focus on the things that you can do from day one of our players coming back, but long before that, to improve their ability to go out and have success, regardless of who those players end up being. Each year in this league, there's new teams, new players, new foundational pieces that emerge in their growth and development. We talk a lot about that word development in this building. So with that, you feel a responsibility to make sure all of our schemes are evolving, changing, and improving year in and year out, and that will be no different every year that I'm the coach here. But that is we're absolutely looking hard at all of our phases of our team right now.
Kevin, how did you feel about the shift to a 3-4 this year, putting some guys in new roles? How did you feel that transition went, especially in terms of communication on the field when they were carrying it out?
Yeah, I think there's a couple layers to that, Ben. I think first and foremost, you got to really understand what that transition really looked like from a standpoint of what snaps are we really talking about from a 3-4 to a 4-3. You look at the percentages of time true base defense was in the game on the field, and understanding what that percentage looks like compared to when you are just in your 4-2 nickel front and everybody is really just in a nickel variation of a 4-3 defense. So every team in this league goes through the roster evaluation process of trying to fit players to the roles that you believe are best for them. I feel like some of our guys really handled that with ease. Some of our guys, it was a work in progress, finding really their finding their premier role, how they can thrive, and then ultimately that's on us as coaches and ultimately me as the head football coach to make sure that I look long and hard at that and then decide what's the best thing for our team moving forward, both from a personnel standpoint, working alongside Kwesi, and how we deploy our personnel, but those schemes that you're talking about. So that's what we're doing right now, really looking at that, that 25 to 28, whatever the percentage was of true base 3-4 that was on the field, and deciding in comparison to the rest of those snaps how we used our players, how we could have been better for them, and then how we make sure we rectify the areas that we weren't good enough.
Kwesi, from a team building standpoint, in terms of who you can count on for next year and moving forward, how are you evaluating your draft class from this year?
Yeah, I mean, that's ongoing. We always use the word here, Bayesian. So you take information and update information based on the amount of the information you have, the quality of the information you have. There's some guys that didn't get to play a lot, some for unfortunate reasons, injury, or others just, had other people play in front of them. But when we talked about this year, Kevin and I, when we sat down, we talked about, building bridges from our young players from this year to next. And so we got a lot of players exposure. Brian Asma obviously is a player like that who we got exposure, but wasn't forced to come into the lineup and play right away, which we think is good for development reasons. I would say it's ongoing. We actually have ways of calculating these things and kind of comparing to other teams based on advanced metrics and different things. Because, like Kevin said, a championship standard is looking in the mirror, being hard on yourself, being accountable to what happened, and trying to find ways to improve. And we do that every day. We're doing that in an ongoing way. This point.
When you have two guys like a Caleb Evans who has 3 concussions and Lewis Seen obviously with the leg, how do you account for those injuries as you're planning for next year? I mean, you don't know for sure what their health is going to be, obviously, but those are 2 key guys.
Yeah, I mean, I think that word "sure" is the perfect word, right? You're never sure, right? It's we live in uncertainty, so you kind of plan almost probabilistically, and that's why you have depth. You have conversations with Kev and say, hey, if we were to lose this person, how could we play? How could we kind of morph this team to be different in different ways? And how we evaluate football isn't just in like a simple way. We talk about the core components of the game and how they all fit together. And I think that helps us in our process. And ultimately that will just come down to depth and being, I think I talked about in my last press conference, the sickness from Ryan Grigson. It's kind of how he's permeated this front office, meaning there's a hunger to search for players and just always find them under every rock, every place in this world. So when you talk about players like Lewis and their contribution that we expect him to make, but we also plan for that next person we bring in and to contribute and develop them in the way that we do here. So that's really the way we fight those battles going forward.
Kwesi, how do you look at the team's salary cap situation? You're a good bit now over the projected cap, and you've got some veterans with big contracts. Do you think you might have to make some hard decisions regarding some of those guys?
Every team's got those constraints, and so at our disposal, like I said earlier, first you start off with the players. We've got good players and good people, so you start there. And ultimately, we have a lot of tools at our disposal, extensions, different things like that, where you can get under the cap and continue on. So we'll consider everything we have, and ultimately it'll be to fit our vision with the end goal in mind of meeting that talent threshold to win a championship.
And if I could follow up on that, you guys, extended Kirk Cousins for a year last year. Is the hope to extend him in some form again this coming March?
It's our expectation that he'll be our quarterback. I can't say exactly how that would look. Again, we have everything at our disposal. We'll consider all those things just like we will with everybody else on the roster.
Kwesi, you used the phrase competitive rebuild back in March. I'm curious, based on the way the season went and obviously making a big move at the deadline, did it end up being more about being competitive for you than the rebuild portion of it?
I would say it still was both. Obviously, I would say that. But if you think a move like T.J. Hockenson, for example, I think that was a today move, but it's also a really great ascending young player who played well for us this year. We have under contract next year, and with the ability to keep around for a long time. He's fit so well into our culture. Again, part of our alignment is sitting in an office, talking about the player, and then watching him use him in the exact way we talked about, which makes my job so much easier and makes our whole front office and our coaching staff just vibe together that much better. So I would say that move would say that it was both a competitive and a rebuild at the same time. But to Kevin's question earlier, you think about the bridges we tried to build from our rookie class to play who's playing now. We had a really great special teams unit, partly comprised of those young players that we have, and then ultimately eventually, at some point, they're going to have to take on bigger roles, and that's all part of the competitive rebuild and all those things we try to factor in.
Kevin, what's your next set of goals for Kirk, as far as him, taking ownership of the offense and building off what occurred this year?
Yeah, I think he, when I envisioned this offense and his fit within the offense, and then watching him really flourish throughout the year, coming to life in big moments, his toughness, his durability, his ability to go out there each and every week and try to put our offense in optimal situations through his play, his leadership, his ownership of the offense. I thought his growth from the beginning to the end and just our personal dialogue, week in and week out with the game plan. I'm excited for not only Kirk, but a lot of our players who will now have a year in the system and can really build off of that. We can evaluate all the things that we did, all the things we did well, things we need to improve, and then tie our players into that as far as how we foundationally build that starting very, day one of our offseason program. We're going to want to have a clear-cut plan of where we want to take our offense, continue to grow roles and responsibilities within it. And I think Kirk will be leading the charge on that with his ability now 1 year in to know there's not so much learning that needs to take place of the base way of doing things. Now we can tweak. Now we can adapt, evolve, and continue to allow him to feel as comfortable as possible with what we're asking him to do. And I think that's where real growth can come, where a lot of people self-reflect on the positives from what I thought was a good year for our offense. There's always going to be ways that I could coach our group better. And I think our players, the best part about our group is each and every week they want more. They want more abilities to affect the game. They want more ways of challenging defenses, and they all look inward of how they could have done things better, and will expect to do so in year two.
Kwesi, Jefferson's in line for a pretty mega contract. What kind of challenge is that as you project your roster and your salary cap going forward? Is that something you start this offseason having a dialogue with him?
I wouldn't use the word challenge. You got a special player, special person. Those aren't problems, or at least those are champagne problems. So we'll start there. We've had initial dialogue with him, his agent, all those things. But we factor that into the planning. But again, it really starts from the player, the person, and we'll work out solutions from there on.
Kwesi, what do you think you learned most in this role during this first year?
I don't know if you guys have enough time. It's so easy, especially from my background, to sit in front of a spreadsheet and make decisions and talk about things, and Kev will tease me sometimes about that. But you sit in exit meetings with players, and it becomes personal at that point. I came from a business where your job is to not be emotional. If you make emotional decisions, you typically make bad decisions. And so when you involve people, it can make the job a lot tougher. But I also think the people aspect of it, that's what culture is, and that's important. That's what led to a lot of these, the historic number of one-score games. And so that's probably been the hardest job, really adjusting to those things. And one of the last times I spoke to you, I was up here, and I think somebody told me my appearance was a little more dour than it normally is, and that was because that was 2 days of emotionally, having to tell people no, having to say that, hey, your dream is stopped for today. And so that element of the job has been eye-opening to me. I would say also, I think somebody maybe mentioned in a media report the other day, the public-facing aspect of the job. That's, I think by nature I'm more, Chad than Pharrell. I'm a kind of a background person. And that's just kind of how I'm wired, right? And so, Kev will tease me sometimes about how my signature looks like I'm signing a check. And I always inform him that that's really the only time I practice signing. I wasn't practicing to be an NFL quarterback, so that's why my signature looks that way. So, those are challenges that I'll have and continue to grow in. And I'm all about self-improvement. I know there's so many ways I can get better. I challenge our staff all year. Hey, look over our processes. Look over these things. How do we get better? Because again, I know everybody else, the people that are already at that championship level, are getting better. So we have to get better, and we have to get better incrementally more than them.
Wait, 3 more minutes. With the way the NFL is going right now, does your roster need to get faster next year overall?
Did you ask me?
Yeah, with the way the NFL is going.
Yeah, I just think it's becoming more and more a space game. I think the the way people are manipulating, just the way they can, manipulate through formations, motions, expansion of formations, using different body types for different roles. I think you're just seeing the ball find its way into space a little bit more. Playmakers with the ball in space, with the ability to create with the ball in their hand, and maybe on top of or outside of the scheme in a lot of ways, where you see some of the best plays, the biggest plays in our league from this year, and you go back and study what that is, and it's a lot of individual players making, momentous plays in those moments where they have the ball in their hand in space, and how can you generate the space, and then defensively, how can you take it away, and how can you limit those opportunities for the other side, and special teams tends to be that game where it's an explosive, full-speed race to either maximize or take away the space. So I think it's an important thing, and I think speed on your roster is something that can stand the test of a season, shows up time and time again, and I think it's an important thing that all 32 teams are constantly looking to add and infuse, and doing it in the ways that fit their particular schemes is one thing, but then how it just affects and changes the other team's ability to try to stop what you're doing.
Kwesi, I'm curious, you mentioned the 11 one-score wins, and people kind of talk about whether there's an element of randomness to that. Is that something that you look at as being repeatable, being that successful in close games?
Another answer that probably could take a long time. Yes, I do think, because we talked about when we got here, looking at the team last year versus this year, the ways we can improve. He talked about being situational masters, which, again, if you look at the results, end of half, end of the game, year over year, those were things that he planned to be better at, and we did. So I think those things are repeatable. But when you talk about one-score games versus not, I don't always necessarily look at that, because a one-score game that you have the ball and could have scored or something like that, those things end up being a little bit different. So we could very easily play in less one-score games and have the same record next year, right? Those are all things that I've considered. So ultimately, our job is, again, to put together a talent threshold to win a championship, have parts that fit together. We don't really necessarily look at one-score games, results, things like that. But I think it's the way you play that might end up causing those things, and ultimately that's our job, to look over those things and study them in the offseason.
Organizationally, when you came in.
For this draft, I think you have a few less picks, at least right now, before compensatories and all that. Is there much in a reasonable way you can do to add to that, or is that just sort of an obstacle you'll have to deal with at this point?
Yeah, there's always ways, but I would also say that, last year when we talked about our plans, it was a 2-year horizon. So last year our class, I think, was bigger than normally you would have expected, and I think we've got a lot of young, good, contributing players out there. So I don't think that we necessarily have, you look at the ages of a lot of guys on sort of the back end of our roster, we've got a lot of good, young, talented players. So I don't see that as a limitation to us, but there's obviously always ways to create more picks.
Last one. Jim? With your defense finishing 31st, that obviously wasn't your goal this year. Do you have a good idea of how you need to approach this and how to correct this? Because does this season look like it was a missed opportunity with all the other things that weren't going right, that you couldn't finish off defensively?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely part of the evaluation process right now, but to think that process did start this week would be a little short-sighted. My job throughout the year was trying to find ways to help and improve and what it was going to take to win each individual game, and some of those close games and some of the turnovers forced and some of the plays that were made on that side of the ball. We know statistically that standard we fell below what we had hoped to be, both schematically and our performance on the field. So I think it's very, very important we look at it from a standpoint of the why. Why did it happen? What were the contributing factors that were both in our control and out of our control, and make sure that we're facing that head on from an accountability standpoint, and then ultimately doing whatever we need to do to make sure we're able to show some improvement in that area and see if we can play the ultimate goal of that complete complementary football that is very important to winning consistently in this league.
You've got some pretty good ideas already, right?
We're working through some things, and I think it's important we do that in all three phases. Special teams, Kwesi mentioned it, we were really proud of the way that came together this year, and the growth and development that will continue with Matt Daniels and Ben Kotwika, goes hand in hand with what we're hoping on offense we can take in year one, and a real core foundation of applying the principles of how we wanted to play seeing where we fell short and seeing how we can maybe grow on the things we did well. And defensively, it's all about finding our way and what that process looks like for improvement and more consistency, knowing that we want to play well in all three phases as we continue to build this thing forward.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
And do appreciate all you guys this year. I know I get to speak with you guys a lot more than Kwesi does, but thank you guys for everything this year, and look forward to seeing you guys soon.